And I want to put aside all the, you know, the politics and just talk man to man here. If we perceived sexual identity is bothersome to me. It's sort of like someone saying that you and I can perceive ourselves to be black this week, but next week we'll be white. Gosh, I can't put my arms around that. I can support sexual orientation. I can support that. But I'm having a lot of consternation with that.
You're talking about gender identity, is that what you're speaking of?
Yeah.
Okay.
The perceived gender identity. I'm having some problems with that, and it's almost as if the person who's the employer and the person who's the employee, you know, it's whose perception is accurate, whose perception is not. How do you quantify that? And I'm being honest with you here. I'm just having a lot of problems with that. Now, I want to also say that I took a look at a couple of places around town. Union Pacific just has sexual orientation. Peter Kiewit, sexual orientation. University of Nebraska at Omaha, sexual orientation. Down in Lincoln, they're not here, but that's all they have, sexual orientation. My immediate boss, which is the College of Education, sexual orientation. Marriott Reservation Center, sexual orientation. Mutual of Omaha. Omaha Public Schools. They don't try to make it muddy. And for me, I think if we pass something today that says sexual orientation, that's a great victory for you. It moves Omaha way, way past where we've been. Why draw such a hard line in the sand and then have this other part where it's kind of, you know, hard to decipher?
Well, let me stop you there and let me address it, you know, from my perspective a little bit. First of all, individuals, when you're talking about gender identity, sometimes that is a reflection of how people in the workplace see a certain individual, and that certain individual, if he feels if the company or a certain group within that company feel that because of the way that person carries himself, that there's a perceived identity that person might be gay. And so then the harassment issues begin to happen. Those things occur. Those are some of the reasons for including gender identity. It's not so much that what the person who is in the LGBT community feels is what those in the workforce may feel about that person, or what they may assume about that person based on the way that person carries themselves. That's why part of it is. That's why it's in there. That's part of the reason why it's in there. I would encourage a couple of other folks who helped put that in there and did the language, but that primarily is the reason for why it's in there. Not so much because of what the individual perceives, but what a company or a group of individuals might perceive about that individual in that company. And that has nothing to do with sexual orientation, because sexual orientation is what that individual views as themselves. Sexual identity has to do with how people may perceive that individual in the workplace.
You know, I named off some pretty solid businesses and entities here, and they seem like they're handling it well. I know Omaha Public Schools is one of your favorite local employers, and they're handling it well with sexual orientation. It's when I compare it to like race, the Constitution, state Constitution, and also our charter, it says race. It doesn't say Hispanics, Vietnamese, Chinese, Germans, it says race. And it seems to me that simple is better. And also, I'd like to say that with the African American community, we didn't get all of our rights in 17 months. It's a process.
Well, we're not suggesting that they get all their rights now either, but I would think that that would be something that we would want to shoot for, number one. But number two, and more importantly to me, all of the organizations that you just outlined, all of them support my ordinance.
Yes, and they support it, and in their written document, they have sexual orientation.
Well, those would have written documents, but all of them, some of them they support my ordinance.
Yes.
They didn't identify whether they support sexual orientation or gender identity. Their response was they support the ordinance.
Sounds like you're drawing a hard line in the sand.
No, it's not a hard line in the sand. What we're doing is we're saying that there are, in the workplace, there are people who perceive other people a certain way and in some instances act on that. That needs to be protected. That's not a hard line in the sand, that's reality.
And it seems to me that they are protected with the classification of sexual orientation.
But they're not, if someone perceives them a certain way and they act on it and it creates a hostile work environment, how do they address that? They don't address that by saying they're saying that you perceive me a certain way and therefore you're acting based on the way you perceive me. What if that individual is not gay?
What if the individual decides that 1 week I perceive myself to be male, and then a month later I perceive myself to be female? And then the smaller companies where you have...
You're missing my argument here, and you're missing the reason for sexual identity. It doesn't have anything to do with how that person perceives themselves. It's how people in the workplace perceive them.
And you're missing my point. My point is that the perception could go both ways. Perception is so vague and so ambiguous that it's hard to quantify. You're asking Omaha businessmen to take a shot in the dark. And maybe we need more education on this. Maybe we need more education, and maybe I need to do more study on it. But right now, at this point, we're trying to pass something.
Mm-hmm.
And why give up a bird in the hand to try and get two in the bush? You can always come back later.
It's a matter of perception, I guess, and I don't know that we're going to agree on this point at this point in time, Dr. Thompson. I don't think we are, quite frankly, because I see it differently from the way you see it. I perceive when we're talking about sexual identity, we're talking about how people in the workplace may perceive an individual. And that person may feel as though they are being harassed by that group of individuals. Sexual identity is part of the reason. Is the reason we put it in there was for that very reason. It didn't have anything to do with how the person perceives themselves. It doesn't have anything to do with that.
But it could be interpreted that way if we pass it.
But I'm saying to you on the record that that's not the intent.
That's not the intent, but when it goes to court, you could still have that issue come up.
Well, you know, I'll discuss all of the court things when I get a chance to lay out my case here. But right now, I don't see us agreeing on this because we're looking at it from two different perspectives.
So you're saying you would walk away from a vote up on sexual orientation if I were to amend out perceived gender identity? You would walk away from that vote?
I would feel that the LGBT community would feel as though they were treated unfairly if I were to agree to eliminate sexual identity, especially when I've explained to you what it's about, and I'm even on the record explaining what it's about.
Sounds like a hard line in the sand. The two gentlemen who got up and left, Mr. President, may I have 5 minutes where I can go back and talk to the two who left,
You're asking for a 5-minute recess?
so that I can talk to these two who got up and left?
Oh,
I
yes.
need to talk.
I understand.
Privately.
That's fine.
All right, thank you.
5-minute recess? Or are we just
Well,
gonna
we're
keep the
just-
meeting going? Okay. Okay.
Ms. Scott,